Remember that time I called you stupid daddy? It is a moment I am fond of. It was the first time I discovered that men can be as tender as the tongue they used to spit out any form of affection that would hold them long enough to break them. I broke you. Disappointment filled your eyes and hurry filled the soles of your feet before your boyish fears could spill on worn carpet we had spent hours play fighting on. It felt like you awakened our conscience. Two girls too pure and naive left a stain on Daddy's chest that sent him up the stairs to retreat in his room. You were too grown to be hurt, and we were too young to afflict. So how did your daughters turn perpetrator in a matter of words? As we scurry upstairs, creak open your door ajar and identify half your body defeated, hanging off the edge of the bed, we felt the tense air close in on us. The first time we were afraid to run into your presence was not when you were scolding and holding us accountable for forgettable mistakes, but when we witnessed your masculinity soften like the evening sun. Still, we followed the odor of your warmth and asked for grace in your eyes, your almond eyes that could reassure a house on fire. Sorry, Daddy was like good news to you, and we became your safe haven all over again. Two girls too pure and naive to heal the hole in Daddy's chest, but we did. I only wish you could heal mine by turning back time and holding me forever. Hey ladies. So this is a focus group and a space under the provocation to be Black and British with grief. And underpinning this sort of provocation is the exploration of fatherlessness, of grief and of Black womanhood, and how those different components intersect, as well as our relationship with language and grief as Black women. Very grateful to have everyone here today to talk about experiences of fatherlessness, particularly how it relates to grief and how it relates to abandonment and how it relates to all those different things that we may have experienced. And so to start this session, I'm just going to do a few housekeeping things. This is an open, I've mentioned before, but this is an open door policy. So at any point you just need a break, you just need a minute. There's 2 doors either side. Please take time, or even just go to the back and decompress where you need to decompress. Just like indicate by maybe raising your hand to Sophia at the back, so that she knows that you're about to walk off, just to take a minute. This is our thread ball, so whenever you want to share something in the space, I can pass the thread to you, and whoever has the thread ball, that person is talking, we hold space for them, we allow them to talk, we don't interfere or interrupt, unless they're welcoming stuff from us. So whoever has the thread ball is the one sort of sharing and talking. That's primarily it. And now I'm going to introduce the discussion of grief, of loss, and of absence. It's going to get a bit heavier. And I really should have brought tissues now that I'm thinking about it, but it's all good. If we need to take a break, we can, as mentioned. So the first thing I want to ask you is how you're doing today. So the older I grow, and kind of connects it to the colours we're wearing and why I've actually asked you, inspired by Annie, because Annie was like, is there any dress code? And I was like, no, but you're onto something actually. So the older I grow, the more I'm beginning to realise that the colour of grief is not Black as traditionally associated with the experience, but quite the opposite. It is an array of striking, unexpected colours that change every day, hence our different bright jumpers. So my question is, what colour is your grief today, and in this season of your life? And Jamie, I know that your experience is particularly abandonment, but I think it's a form of grief as well. So feel free to answer that question. But I'm gonna go with Annie if you're happy to answer that question first. What colour is your grief today?
I'll probably say blue. I think blue is quite a calm colour, so I'm feeling quite calm, collected, just very easygoing. Yeah,
thank you.
I think today, it's yellow, new beginnings. I think just generally speaking, in regards to grief, for a long time it was really dark and really deep. But now, despite the grief being there, I feel like I'm able to still enjoy and look forward to new things. So yeah, yellow.
That's beautiful. For me, I'd say the colour of my grief today would be grey, which is like kind of opposite to what we're all sort of wearing. But it's kind of like black is like if black is associated with like darkness and deep grief and like isolation, grey is more like I'm coming into the light a bit. So it's not actually doom and gloom. It's that I now feel like I'm able to welcome light into my grief. That it's actually not just this sort of like, it's not totally dark and it's not totally black. I'm allowing different colour and light into the process of grieving. And that can look like joy, that can look like contentment, that can look like acceptance, that can look like different things. But there is light. It's not just this, it is a horrid experience, 100%, but it's not just that. And that's why I think I'm moving towards like the grey scale. Jamie, what colour is your grief today?
I would honestly say black.
Okay.
Only because I've never actually really sat down to process my emotions and obviously certain things that have happened and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm feeling a lot of emotion right now. So I would say it's black, but then again, I would also say, can I say two colours?
Yeah, of course.
I would also say it's blue, like light blue,
Okay.
only because at the same time I'm healing, but I only started healing now,
Wow.
like as of 2 months ago, if I'm allowed to say this right now.
Yes,
but
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so I would say black only because right now I feel a bit resentful, and then I would say blue because, yeah, I'm healing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a really lovely and
Thank
honest
you.
answer. We're now going to move on to like the definition of grief and how we define grief for ourselves. And one of my favourite quotes in TV history, but also pertaining to grief, and this is from One Division: "What is grief if not love persevering?" And that's the quote from the show. And this is particularly for the women here whose fathers have passed on. How would you define grief in your own words? I'm going to start with Rachel this time. It's a bit heavy, sorry, but...
For me, grief for me, losing my dad, felt like my foundation being taken away. Like it felt like the stability of life being stripped and being alone. Yeah, for now, that's what I would say.
It's powerful.
What does grief look like?
How would you define
How would I
grief?
define
How
grief?
would you define grief?
I think it's, having something and then no longer having it, and as a result, no longer having it creates some sort of gap or a void, is how I describe grief. Yeah.
Thank you, Annie. So this is how I would define abandonment, Jamie, in your situation. So I think abandonment or deliberate absence is a kind of complicated and corrupt experience of grief. How would you define grief in your context?
I don't know. This is. How would I define grief? I would define it as loss, as well as she said, a gap, because I feel so much that there's so much void within, and for me, I would say also confusion, because like I don't even know if you're alive or dead. Like I don't know where you are at all. So it's like I'm also grieving and I feel void, then I'm confused. So all in one.
All in one, yeah.
Just all in one, I would say all those three to define grief. If that makes sense.
That does make sense. The next question is, how has the feelings of grief manifested since the loss and absence of your father? Jamie, I know you've just answered, but I'm going to put it to you first. How has the feelings of grief manifested? What does it look like in your sort of everyday life since your father left or was no longer in your life?
Straight anger, honestly. For me as well, like my anger's not like it's more like I'm always silent. Sorry. And I would say I cover being hurt with anger, if that makes sense. So I'm really hurt, but I'm covering it with anger, if that makes sense. So it's manifested as me being angry, but I'm actually hurt, but I just don't know how to express how I actually feel. So I would just say, just anger, resentment, kind of bitterness, kind of unforgiveness, but then again, I get it, but then again, I don't. Like, confusion. So confusion, anger, and bitterness.
So I think for me, early on, it was like a lot of numbness within positive experiences.
Okay.
So like there's an achievement, everyone's so happy.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're happy, but your happiness is like dimmed down. And that inability to really enjoy experiences. Thank you. To enjoy experiences. So my dad passed away in 2020. And during the time he passed away, I was right in the middle of my therapy course. I was right in the middle of my therapy course. I took a month off for the funeral. The week after the funeral, I was back speaking to clients. And then I passed, and everyone was so proud of me, but I didn't feel proud. That's one example. But I guess going back to your, you mentioned about other people having fathers, and then it's like, oh, I think for me, where I felt it was in the little things. So like, anytime I went on holiday, my dad would always pick me up and drop me. And more recently, when I've been traveling, that isn't the case. Just feeling the absence in the small, but also the bigger things as well. I guess it manifests also with like worry about what things will be like in the future. So I think I have my mum, so that manifests as me being quite protective of her. Being intentional with spending time with her, taking pictures, because I'm very aware that like loss and death is something that happens to everybody. So I want to be more intentional with the time I spend with my mum and the rest of my family. But that numbness is definitely there. I passed my driving test February 2020, and then my dad passed away in July. It was like little things, like when I got my actual first car, I didn't have to fill up petrol. Like, all these stuff my dad did. My mum drives from A to B only, my dad drives everywhere. So it's like the little things like, oh, you never taught me this. And like similar example, there was these bagels my dad would always buy, and then a brown like paper bag. I have no idea where in London he got them from, and it's just those little things.
I think for me it's definitely, I discovered there was something called grief-related social anxiety, because I noticed that I didn't really want to go to places, so there was definitely a lot of isolation in that regard. Like I hadn't even been to church for 4+ months, and then when I did come back, it was like super overwhelming because I haven't been here for ages. Obviously, one thing that played a part was that I knew that God was transitioning me to a new spiritual house, so that also played a part. But I think the bigger thing was really that it was just everyone knowing what's happened, and then you just not really wanting to just come, and then just everyone's just overwhelming you with questions, or like everyone's feeling sorry for you and all that stuff. So I just wanted to kind of avoid that. So yeah, that's something that still can happen from time to time. But yeah, I think, so it's called grief-related social anxiety, because I actually had to research it and say like, am I being weird, or is this something people actually experience? And I realized that it wasn't just me. So that was definitely one thing. I think also Be more protective as well. Like I'm a firstborn, so I have two siblings who are younger. I think it made me much more protective over them. Not really wanting to take a father's role, but indirectly, subconsciously kind of doing that. So yeah, that's definitely been two ways that grief has manifested.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? In regards to like, how does it feel having the responsibility of being firstborn as well when you're two younger siblings as well? Is that what are those feelings like? Is that a privilege to you? Is that a burden to you? Do you feel guilty sometimes that it may feel like a burden or like a heavy weight?
I think I don't know. I think you just kind of just do it naturally. Yeah, so I don't really know how it feels. It just feels like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it feel like a burden? I wouldn't say so, because I think someone has to take up the certain responsibilities. So yeah, I wouldn't say it feels like a burden, but it's just something you're always aware of. Yeah.
More of the awareness of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. This is one of my favourite quotes, and we're talking about grief and its relationship with language now. And this is from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is one of my favourite authors. But she describes grief as, grief is a cruel kind of education. You learn how ungentle mourning can be, how full of anger you can be. You learn how glib condolences can feel. You learn how much grief is about language, the failure of language, and the grasping for language. And what is your relationship like with grief? What is your relationship like with grief and language and voice? How have you, and what I mean by that is, how have you navigating the expression, the linguistic expression of your, or the verbal expression of your grief? If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah. I'm trying to figure my answer out in my head. I don't know if it's
I can answer the question first while you guys are thinking, because I know it's a bit. But for me, I never initially had language for my grief. In terms of because I lost my dad when I was very young, when I was 6 years old, it was just something that happened to me, and then life moved on. So when I lost my dad, we were living in Lewisham, as I mentioned earlier, and we literally packed our clothes and our stuff in bin bags, and my cousins, my aunties and my uncles came to pick us up and move us to Essex. And then we lived with my cousins in my cousin's house for a couple of years till we found our own place near them. And life would just happen to me. So there was and I remember the first thing I said to my cousin is that, oh, my dad's dead. And they were like, oh, really? And they were like, and I was like, yeah. And we're like, okay, and we continue to play. So because my emotional intelligence and maturity is bare minimum. I don't have that emotional intelligence or maturity to know that this is a sad thing that's happened, to know that this is a bad thing that's happened. What made me be able to process that it was sad and it was bad, because my mum was crying and she was on the phone and she was hyperventilating up and down the corridor, and she was saying in Yoruba, Bolaji ti ku, which means like Bolaji is dead, and we could understand a bit of Yoruba at that point as well. So I knew that something bad had happened, but I was more sort of like, my mum's sad, so this is really sad, as opposed to understanding and grasping what really happened and what it really meant to have lost my dad. And so I guess the sort of like early years growing up, there was never really language to my grief, but there was in that I was so indifferent about it. I would use it as a weapon almost. Like, so during primary school and secondary school, if I wanted to manipulate, or if I wanted to make friends, or if I wanted to just get attention, because there was a lot of attention seeking in my early years, I would be like, oh, my dad's dead, sort of thing, and make other little kids feel bad and like be like, oh, we're really sorry, like we didn't mean, like I could be in the wrong, and I'd be like, my dad's dead, and they'll be like, sorry, didn't mean to hurt you. And it was just used as a weapon. And then the more I grew up, and that even happened in secondary school, I used to just kind of like wanted so much attention around it, and I used it as a weapon. But then when I was in my sort of latter years of secondary school, going up to uni, I was like, oh, my dad's dead. So it wasn't like my dad, it wasn't a flippant, it was like, my dad's dead. And it was like, oh no, this is really bad. And so it took me years. It took me a good 13, 14 years to be able to process that my dad being dead is a sad thing. And so I never used to say it so much. It never used to be such a flippant information that I just sort of shared. You would have to dig to be able to understand or learn that my father's died. And it's something that I in my current being 24, like I talk about now because a lot of my work explores grief, and that's that's an intentional thing because I don't think there is a lot of work that explores grief with nuance. But the actual talking of my grief hasn't been able to talk about it in a way that's gentle and honest and sincere. Only started in my early 20s when I started taking therapy and I started being able to understand what mental health and emotional health and trauma is. But literally when I was growing up, it was like a thing I used as a weapon, and now it's a thing that I'm now exploring in my work, but also a thing that I'm healing from through therapy and other like mental health sort of well-being resources and tools that I'm using. So it's been a weird journey for me with my language with grief. It's not a flippant thing now. It's a thing that I take quite seriously now.
So when you were speaking there, I think you said, "Oh, my dad is dead," and I think for me, even now, I don't say that. I feel like my dad's passed away. He's not here. But I feel like death just feels so permanent, and it feels too absolute. So for me, it's more him passing or he's passed. And there was a situation a while ago where I think I was talking with a colleague about Christmas, and she was talking about her dad at Christmas, and accidentally I spoke about him in like present tense, and I just felt so guilty about it. But I guess that shows for me, I still haven't got over that fact as well. And I think more of a separate point in regards to language, I think like when he passed away, there was a lot of, I know exactly how you feel. And it's like, I don't know how I feel, but I don't think you know how I feel. So how can you say that? So there was a lot of like frustration towards other people in terms of their language towards me in that grieving process when he passed away.
Rich, I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts about like what you think is the distinction, between acknowledgement and sympathy, and maybe any scenarios you've been in where you can tell that someone's like, even through text as well, performance sympathy and condolences and all that language, and the difference where someone acknowledges it and it feels good that they're acknowledging it and they're not performing sympathy. I don't know if that makes sense, but
that does make sense. I think for me, it's not really what they say, it's how they say it, how it's delivered. Like, are you just saying it just to like move on the conversation? Are you saying because you feel like you have to say it? Or do you actually want to know how I am and actually how I'm dealing with this? But also it's people's like attunement to those conversations. So actually you asked me a question about my dad, I'm like, oh, my dad passed away. And you're like, oh, sorry, and then you move on to the next conversation that feels quite dismissive, as you mentioned. Or, oh, that's really sad. Like, what do you want to do with that? It's attunement to my response and knowing how to navigate that conversation, not forcing that conversation on me. So after my dad passed away, I wanted therapy straight away. And they said, no, you have to wait. I think it was a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And the person that I did therapy with, it wasn't Christian first and foremost, which it doesn't have to be, but I didn't think she understood the context of my grief. And I felt like she was imposing her way of grieving on me. And then she talked about making an altar, having his picture there. And I said, I know this is for me. So yeah, I didn't really follow through with that. And then a couple months later, I found Christian counselling, and it was actually a black older man who was my therapist. So big up him, he was amazing. And he just gave me the space to like talk through my grief. And I think the fact that I didn't ask for a male person, or I didn't ask for a black man, but that's what I got. And he was Christian as well. So I think it gave me a lot of like safety, but also willingness to explore my grief with somebody that doesn't look like my dad, but he's a male figure as well. And I think that worked really well for me. Yeah.
What about you, Jamie?
What was the question?
So the question is, have you received any adequate emotional well-being support after like the process of losing your father or not having a father? Have you received any like practical care to support you and your emotional health and well-being? The answer could be short, it could be yes or no, but yeah.
I don't think I have, but I have at the same time. Like, I haven't gone therapy or anything, and that's something that I want to do. But in terms of like my friends, I feel like they're my support system in that area now, because I only revealed to them recently that obviously I don't have a dad. So after I revealed that, they've been there and they've been encouraging me in that area. And in a way, like, my brothers in Christ have been like a male figure in my life that I see important, not near to a father figure, but it's like they cover me, they pray for me. And if like I go through anything, they're there and they're gonna tell me what's wrong and stuff like that. So I would say, yeah, kind of, to be honest, in a different way though, not professional.
So, yes, I think I'm going to share some writing. I'm writing some sort of memoir called My Father in Years. Yeah, this one's a bit deep, but yeah. So, when I envision my homeland, I envision a land, not a home. A land that swallowed a man whole in attempt to bury the laughter of his children. A land that pays no regards to your blood's relation and heart's allegiance to its soil, the same soil your first home was built on. A land that welcomes souls to untimely deaths you spent 40 years casting and binding in prayers that didn't make it past Ibadan. A land that hijacked fathers that placed too much trust in their roots, and woe to the man unable to discern between a land and his home. For a home could only preserve life, even the most fragile of bones, and Nigeria can never offer me such a hope. Nigeria is a thief, a land that swallowed a father whole in attempt to bury the laughter of his children's children.